So, you started with pike and shot era, either wargaming or just military history. Now you are reading about the armies, and infantry is pretty straightforward. You have pikemen, you have musketeers, and then you get to the cavalry and you are like, what the hell? So, that's why I'm here, to try to explain you in 10 minutes the major types of cavalry in the 30 Years War. There are several ways how you can classify a cavalry in the 30 Years War. Some are based on the use of the cavalry. It was shock troop cavalry for cavalry charges, or it was more firepower shooting cavalry from distance. About the armor. And the last type how you can do it is about the unarmed. There are two main tactical use for cavalry in the era of the 30 Years War. First is as shock trooper cavalry, which was mainly for the cuirassier type of cavalry, which was heavy cavalry, but not every time heavy cavalry, who would just charge straight up to the enemy infantry formation, unleash the volley of harquebusiers or pistols at the close range, and if the formation was disrupted, they follow up with the swords and sabers to the mass of the infantry, which was hopefully disturbed by the shooting. Another type of the use was the shooting, and that was almost the same. Cavalry would trot or gallop close to the enemy infantry, shoot at them, but instead of follow-up charge, they retreated, reloaded and repeated, and do it as long as it takes to break the enemy formation or retire. There were also some exceptions, they are always there, but there were two main use for the, and for these two use we have also the, you can say, two main cavalry types for the era. First of them were the cuirassiers, which were what would you expect from the name. They were cuirass, front and back armor. They have also armor on the shoulders and on the upper half of their legs. So basically they were armored from their knees to their head, and basically were super heavy cavalry in the type of medieval knight of the late medieval period. And it was probably the last time that heavy cavalry makes some difference on the battlefield. But what was different from the medieval counterpart was the unarmed, because by the time of the 30 Years War, the lance was basically obsolete weapon with few exceptions, and the main weapon of the cuirassier was then two pistols. So they were charging to the enemy, they unleashed the volley of their pistols, and then they follow up charge into the enemy formations. Of course, there are some exceptions, like the Polish wing hussars, which we can classify as cuirassiers by the Western or Central European point of view. Polish hussar was still required by the law to carry one or two pistols depending on his social rank, so it was still pistol wielding cuirassier even if they have a lance. The second large group was Harquebusier. He was cavalry armed with arquebus, which was carbine version of the arquebus for infantry. That's the reason in some parts of Europe they were called carabiniers, because they have carabine. And they were, we could say, medium cavalry in the term of the armor. They have front plate and back plate. They have helm, probably leather buff coat. So they weren't real light cavalry without armor, but they were not, in theory, so armored as the cuirassiers with 3/4 armor covering almost the entire body. And Harquebusier was armed with arquebus, said earlier, and his main function was to ride to the enemy infantry formation fire his arquebus and repeat in so-called caracole fighting style, which was the caracole is in Spanish in snails, and it meant that the cavalry like the snail would just row right to the infantry, fire, retreat, reload, continue until the infantry break. Before the 30th war there was sometimes caracole used against the enemy cavalry. Last time was the Battle of Krushino, where Russians tried to do this against the Polish winged hussars, but there was one issue, and that when you discharge your rifle at the enemy cavalry, they could just countercharge you when you were reloading, so by the time of the 30th war that was just used against the infantry. Also there are some debates how caracole was used or intended, if it was real battlefield tactic or it was just some measure how to use raw cavalry without any good morale or discipline, who wouldn't charge the enemy like the cuirassiers because they don't have the guts for it, so they at least use it this way, that they will shoot, retreat, because they aren't capable of shooting and charging the enemy. This seems clear, but there are some the stuff start to complicate here, because for example British, they were calling harquebusier every type of infantry with the breastplate and helmet, because that was the armor for the harquebusier. Even if the cavalry itself doesn't have an arquebus and was used more like cuirassier. He have a helmet and armor, so he's harquebusier. He's not cuirassier because he doesn't have the big 3/4 armor. Same is for the Germans, which they were using arquebusier as their main infantry together with the cuirassiers, and they sometimes call them arquebusiers, but sometimes call them Reiter, which means rider in German. So you see Reiter, and it could mean any type of cavalry. Probably it would be, even if it would be called bandolier Reiter, it would mean an arquebusier. But the Reiter doesn't have the armor or the we could say medium heavy armor, which arquebusier probably would wear. He could just have the buff coat or just plain clothes. To complicate it even more, east of Germany, in the Poland-Lithuanian Commonwealth and in the Russia, the term Reiter was used just for the arquebusier mercenaries from the Germany, for the both armored and unarmored type. To complicate it even more, for example Swedish, they just call their cavalry. In theory, all the cavalry was, by the use of them, were cuirassiers, because Swedish cavalry was used for the really aggressive shoot and charge tactics. But Sweden wasn't really best equipped, and many of the cavalry doesn't have the real 3/4 cuirassier armor, almost none of them in the great scale of the number of the cavalry regiments. So they called there in cavalry sometimes, which we can translate it as light rider. But the light rider wasn't light cavalry, as we would imagine, but it was a guy with hopefully breastplate and 2 pistols. So he was basically light cuirassier without the cuirass. But it was called still Reiter, the same as Poland called arquebusier with armor or without armor, and that's the part where it complicated. And to make it even worse, basically every major power in Europe had their own names for the cavalry, sometimes interchangeable, sometimes not. So arquebusier would be called arquebusier in England, he would be called Reiter in Russia, and carabiner in Spanish, and it would also always mean the same horse. Or sometimes not, because sometimes it would mean a light cuirassier. I hope you still follow me. And except these two main times, we have also the real light cavalry. It was called Croats because this type of light cavalry was, let's say, showed to the Central and Western Europe by the Imperial armies and their mercenary Croats. So they called all the light cavalry Croats, even if there were Hungarian Hussars or Polish Cossacks, which to complicate it even more, Cossack was also type of the cavalry in the Polish-Lithuanian Commonwealth, which could be, well, real just light Polish cavalry, it could be light Ukrainian cavalry, it could be a real Cossack, sometimes not. It was just Cossack type cavalry. And also, this Polish light cavalry would be called in the Western Europe Polish Cossack or even Croat, even if he was from region of what's today Belarus. Well, we are now in 12 minutes instead of 10. I hoped it helped you to understand better how complicated, but really not complicated, is the cavalry in the 30 Years War. So to sum it up, you can classify them as chargers or shooters, and as armored and unarmored in the most basic level. And I didn't even start on dragoons because by the time of the 30 Years War, there were no cavalry, there were just mounted infantry with horses. So, I hope it helped you, and if you have any questions about the topic, feel free to ask me in the comments, and if you like this video, feel free to press the like button and even subscribe. Thank you for watching, and hopefully see you on the next one. Bye!